The blood on her hands would not wash away, no matter how hard Lily Bennett scrubbed them in the trough behind the general store. And the worst part was that it belonged to a man she had tried to save rather than harm. Independence. Missouri had always been unforgiving to those who stepped outside the boundaries of what was considered proper. But Lily had never imagined that showing basic human kindness would lead to her complete ruin in the summer of 1867. The stranger had stumbled into town just after dawn, his shirt soaked crimson, his face pale as milk, and when he collapsed right outside her father's store, Lily had done what any decent person would do. She had dragged him inside, torn strips from her own petticoats to bind his wounds, and given him water even though she knew nothing about who he was or where he came from. Her father, Thomas Bennett, had discovered her kneeling beside the unconscious man an hour later when he came down from their living quarters above the store. The fury in his eyes had been instant and terrible. Within minutes, half the town seemed to know that Lily Bennett had allowed a stranger into their establishment, had touched him, had been alone with him in a way that no respectable unmarried woman should ever be. The fact that the man had been bleeding and barely conscious mattered not at all to the good people of Independence. The stranger had regained consciousness long enough to tell her his name was Zachary Ross, that he had been ambushed by outlaws on the trail outside town, and that he needed to reach his brother's ranch in Kansas. His voice had been weak but sincere, his dark eyes filled with gratitude even through his obvious pain. Lily had believed him, had seen the honesty in his weathered face, had noticed the calluses on his hands that spoke of honest labor rather than the smooth palms of a card sharp or thief. But none of that mattered to her father or to the town council that assembled in the store that very afternoon. They stood in a semicircle around her, these men who had known her since childhood, their faces set in expressions of disappointment and disgust that cut deeper than any blade could have. Reverend Patterson spoke first, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow as he proclaimed that Lily had compromised not only her own virtue, but the reputation of her entire family. Mayor Hutchinson agreed, his jowls quivering as he listed the ways in which she had violated proper conduct. Her father said nothing, but his silence was perhaps the most damning indictment of all. Zachary Ross had tried to speak on her behalf, had attempted to rise from the cot where she had placed him despite his weakened state. He had told them she was innocent of any wrongdoing, that she had saved his life through her compassion and quick thinking, that they should be celebrating her courage rather than condemning it. His words fell on deaf ears. The men of Independence had already made up their minds, and the fact that this stranger defended her only seemed to confirm their suspicions that something improper had occurred. The punishment was swift and comprehensive. Lily was forbidden from working in the store, forbidden from attending church services, forbidden from participating in any social gatherings. She was to remain in the family's living quarters and reflect on her shameful behavior. Her father made it clear that no decent man would have her now, that she had destroyed any chance of a respectable marriage, and that she would likely live out her days as a burden on her family rather than a blessing. The harshness of his words stung all the more because Lily had always been a dutiful daughter, had always done exactly as she was told, had never given her family a moment's trouble before this. Zachary Ross left town the next morning, still weak but determined not to bring any more trouble down on the young woman who had saved him. Lily watched from her window as he mounted a horse that someone had grudgingly provided and rode slowly out of Independence. She wondered if she would ever see him again, wondered if he would remember the woman who had been punished for showing him mercy, wondered if he thought about her at all once, he was safely away from this place that had treated them both so poorly. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of Lily's life. She was 20 years old, an age when most young women in Independence were either already married or actively courting, but now she was treated as though she carried some contagious disease. Former friends crossed the street to avoid speaking to her on the rare occasions when she was allowed outside. Young men who had once seemed interested in calling on her suddenly found reasons to look the other way. Even at the general store, customers who had known her since childhood now refused to be served by her on the few occasions when her father relented and allowed her to help with inventory in the back room. Her mother, Martha Bennett, tried to be sympathetic in her own limited way. She would sit with Lily in the evenings, mending clothes by lamplight, and speak in hushed tones about how time heals all wounds and how eventually people would forget. But there was resignation in her mother's voice, an acceptance that Lily's life had fundamentally changed in ways that could never be fully repaired. Martha had lived her entire life according to the strict social codes of their community, and while she loved her daughter, she also believed that Lily had been foolish to involve herself with a stranger regardless of the circumstances. September brought cooler weather and the promise of autumn, but no relief from Lily's isolation. She spent her days helping with household chores, reading the few books they owned over and over again, and staring out the window at a town that had rejected her. She thought often of Zachary Ross, wondering if his wounds had healed properly, wondering if he had reached his brother's ranch safely, wondering if he ever thought about the young woman in Independence who had paid such a heavy price for helping him. Sometimes, she felt angry that he had ridden away and left her to face the consequences alone, but mostly, she just felt empty. Her father began receiving letters from distant relatives, suggestions of places where Lily might be sent to live quietly away from Independence, where her shame would not reflect so poorly on the family. There was an elderly aunt in Ohio who needed someone to care for her, a widowed cousin in California who required help with her children, a missionary family in Oregon who could always use an extra pair of hands. Each suggestion felt like another nail in the coffin of the life Lily had once imagined for herself, a life with a home and family of her own right here in the town where she had been born. Then, on a crisp October morning when the leaves were turning gold and scarlet, Zachary Ross rode back into Independence. Lily was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the store when she heard the commotion out front, the murmur of surprised voices, and the sound of a horse being reined to a stop. She hurried around to the front of the building and stopped dead at the sight of him. He looked different than she remembered, stronger and healthier, his color restored and his bearing confident. He sat astride a fine bay horse and wore clean clothes and a new hat, but his eyes were the same, dark and sincere. And when they found her standing there with a laundry basket on her hip, something in them made her heart skip in her chest. "Miss Bennett," he said, dismounting with an easy grace that spoke of complete recovery from his injuries. "I have come back as I promised I would." Lily stared at him, confused because she did not remember any promise. Behind her, she heard her father emerge from the store, his footsteps heavy on the wooden planks of the porch. Other townspeople began to gather, drawn by curiosity and the ever-present hunger for gossip that seemed to fuel so much of Independence's social life. Lily felt her cheeks burning, felt the weight of all those watching eyes, felt the familiar shame that had become her constant companion. "You should not be here," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will only make things worse." Zachary walked toward her with deliberate steps, and she noticed that several men from town moved as if to intercept him, but something in his bearing made them hesitate. When he was close enough that only she could hear his words clearly, he spoke with quiet intensity that sent shivers down her spine despite the warmth of the morning sun. "I made myself a promise the day I left this town," he said. "I promised that I would come back for you, that I would make things right, that I would not let you suffer for the kindness you showed me." "There is nothing you can do," Lily said, and she hated the defeat in her own voice. "The damage is done. My reputation is destroyed. Even if you tell them again that nothing improper happened, they will not believe you." "I am not here to convince them of your innocence," Zachary said. "I am here to ask you to be my wife." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Lily's laundry basket slipped from her hands and hit the ground, spilling clean sheets into the dust. Around them, the gathered crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and exclamations. Her father's voice rose above the others, angry and disbelieving. "Now see here," Thomas Bennett shouted, striding forward with his face red with fury. "You cannot simply ride into town and make such a proposal. You know nothing about my daughter and she knows nothing about you. This is completely improper." Zachary turned to face the older man, his expression respectful but firm. "With respect, sir, I know that your daughter has more courage and compassion than anyone else I have met in all my travels. I know that she saved my life when she could have simply closed the door and left me to die in the street. I know that she was punished for her kindness while I recovered at my brother's ranch and went about my business as if nothing had happened. That does not sit right with me. It has not sat right with me for a single day since I left Independence." "That does not give you the right to propose marriage," Thomas sputtered, though some of the anger had left his voice, replaced by confusion and perhaps a hint of something that might have been hope. "You must court her properly. Give us time to investigate your character and your prospects." "I have a ranch in Kansas," Zachary said, addressing not just Thomas but the entire gathered crowd. 3,000 acres of good grazing land that my brother and I have built up over the past 5 years. I have cattle and horses, a solid house, and money in the bank. I am 26 years old in good health as your daughter's care made possible, and I have no wife or entanglements. I attend church when I can, do not drink to excess, and have never been arrested or accused of any crime except by the outlaws who shot me and left me for dead. The ambush that brought me to your town was a case of mistaken identity, and those men have since been apprehended by a marshal and are awaiting trial." He paused, and his eyes found Lily's again across the few feet that separated them. When he spoke next, his voice was softer, meant for her alone even though everyone could hear. "I do not expect you to love me, Miss Bennett. I do not even expect you to like me very much at first. But I am offering you a way out of this situation, a chance for a new life away from people who have judged you unfairly. If you agree to be my wife, I will spend the rest of my days trying to prove myself worthy of the gift you gave me when you saved my life." Lily found that she could not speak, could not form words around the emotions swirling in her chest. Hope and fear and disbelief, all tangled together until she felt dizzy with it. This man, this stranger who was not quite a stranger, was offering her everything she thought she had lost. But marriage was not something to be entered into lightly, especially not marriage to someone she barely knew. "I need time to think," she finally said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "This is not a decision that should be made in a moment." "Take all the time you need," Zachary said immediately. "I will be staying at the hotel for as long as necessary. When you have made your decision, you can find me there." He tipped his hat to her, nodded to her father, and walked back to his horse with the same easy confidence he had shown since arriving. As he rode away toward the hotel, the crowd began to disperse, everyone eager to discuss this shocking development in their homes and businesses. Lily stood frozen in place, her mind racing, until her father's hand on her shoulder made her jump. "Come inside," Thomas said quietly. "We need to talk about this." The conversation that followed was unlike any Lily had ever had with her parents. They sat around the small table in their living quarters, and for the first time since the incident with Zachary Ross, her father actually seemed to be listening to her rather than simply pronouncing judgment. He asked her what she wanted, whether she had any feelings for this man, whether she was willing to take such a risk. Her mother worried about Lily moving so far away, about her being isolated on a ranch with a man she barely knew, about all the things that could go wrong. But underneath their concerns, Lily sensed something else: relief. Her parents had been struggling with what to do with her, how to repair the damage to her reputation, whether they would be supporting their unmarried daughter for the rest of their lives. Zachary Ross's proposal offered a solution to all those problems. It was not the future they had imagined for her, but it was better than the bleak prospects she currently faced. "What do you want, Lily?" her mother asked finally, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand. "Forget about what anyone else thinks or wants. What does your heart tell you?" Lily thought about the question carefully. Her heart told her that she had been drawn to Zachary Ross from the moment she first saw him, even bleeding and unconscious in the dust. Her heart told her that his willingness to come back for her, to face a hostile town and offer her a way out, spoke of character and honor. Her heart told her that staying in independence meant a lifetime of whispers and sidelong glances and diminishing prospects. But her head warned her that marriage to a stranger was a risk, that she might be trading one form of misery for another, that love was not guaranteed just because a man made a grand gesture. "I want to talk to him," Lily said finally. "I want to know more about him, about what my life would be like on his ranch. I want to make an informed decision." Her father nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. I will accompany you to the hotel tomorrow morning, and you can speak with him in the lobby where it will be proper and supervised." But Lily shook her head. "No, father, I appreciate your concern, but this is my decision to make. After everything that has happened, I think I have earned the right to conduct this conversation without chaperones and supervisors. My reputation cannot be damaged any more than it already has been." Thomas Bennett looked as though he wanted to argue, but something in Lily's expression must have convinced him that she would not be swayed. He sighed heavily and nodded his agreement, though he insisted that she at least wait until the following afternoon when the hotel would be busy with other guests who could serve as informal witnesses to propriety. Lily barely slept that night, her mind churning with questions she wanted to ask and fears she needed to voice. When the next afternoon finally arrived, she dressed carefully in her best day dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and made her way to the hotel. She could feel eyes on her as she walked through town, could hear the whispers that followed in her wake, but for the first time in weeks, she held her head high. Whatever happened next, at least she was taking action rather than simply accepting her fate. Zachary was sitting in the hotel lobby reading a newspaper when she arrived. He stood immediately upon seeing her, setting the paper aside and gesturing to a pair of chairs near the window where they would have some privacy, while still remaining visible to anyone who cared to look. Lily settled into one of the chairs, arranging her skirts with nervous hands, and waited for him to speak. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "I was not entirely certain you would." "I need to know more about you," Lily said, deciding that directness was the best approach. "I need to know what kind of life you are offering me, what you expect from a wife, what happens if we marry and discover we do not suit one another." Zachary leaned back in his chair, considering her words carefully before responding. Those are fair questions, and I will answer them as honestly as I can. My ranch is about 100 miles west of here, just across the Kansas border. It is not fancy, but it is comfortable. The house has 4 rooms, a good stove, and windows with real glass. My brother Matthias and his wife Sarah live about 5 miles away on their own property. The nearest town is about 12 miles from the ranch, small but with everything we need, including a church and a school. You mentioned a brother, Lily said. Is it just the 2 of you? We had a younger sister, Zachary said, and something in his voice shifted, grew heavier. She died of fever 3 years ago. That loss is part of why your kindness meant so much to me, I think. Rebecca was always the one who helped people, who saw the best in everyone. When you pulled me inside and tended my wounds, even though you did not know me and had every reason to be cautious, it reminded me of her. Lily felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you, Zachary said quietly. As for what I expect from a wife, I suppose I want what most men want. A partner, someone to share the work and the joys of building a life. I will not lie and say that ranching is easy, because it is not. There is always work to be done, and I would need your help with many things. But I would never expect you to do anything beyond your strength, and I would make sure you had time for yourself, for reading or sewing or whatever brings you pleasure. And if we do not get along, Lily pressed, if we marry and discover we have made a terrible mistake. Zachary met her eyes directly, his expression serious. I would hope we could talk through any problems that arise and find solutions together. But I will make you this promise right now, Miss Bennett. If you agree to be my wife, I will treat you with respect and kindness every day of our lives together. I will never raise my hand to you in anger, never demean or belittle you, never make you regret your decision if I can help it. You saved my life, and I will spend the rest of mine trying to give you the happiness you deserve. They talked for over 2 hours, sitting in that hotel lobby while the afternoon light slanted through the windows and other guests came and went around them. Zachary told her about growing up in Kentucky, about coming west with his brother after their parents died, about the hard work of establishing the ranch and the satisfaction of seeing it prosper. He described the landscape of Kansas, the endless sky and rolling grasslands, the way thunderstorms moved across the plains like something alive. He spoke of his friends and neighbors, of barn raisings and church socials, of a community that judged people by their actions rather than their adherence to rigid social codes. Lily found herself relaxing as they talked, found that she enjoyed his company and the way he listened to her as carefully as she listened to him. When she told him about her own childhood and independence, about her love of reading and her dreams of seeing more of the world beyond Missouri, he did not laugh or tell her that such aspirations were inappropriate for a woman. Instead, he promised that he would take her to Kansas City someday, maybe even further if she wished, because he believed that everyone deserved to have their horizons expanded. When she finally left the hotel and walked back to the store, Lily's mind was no longer churning with confusion and doubt. Instead, she felt a curious sense of calm, as though some part of her had already made the decision even if she was not quite ready to acknowledge it. She thought about the life Zachary was offering, thought about the alternative of staying in independence with her ruined reputation and bleak prospects, thought about the way his eyes had lit up when he talked about his ranch and the life he was building there. That evening, she told her parents that she had decided to accept Zachary's proposal. Her mother cried, though whether from sadness or relief or some combination of both, Lily could not quite tell. Her father simply nodded, and said he would make the arrangements for a wedding to take place as soon as the necessary preparations could be completed. There was no long engagement, no elaborate celebration. Given the circumstances, everyone agreed that a simple ceremony followed by Lily's immediate departure for Kansas was the most appropriate course of action. The wedding took place 1 week later in the small church, where Lily had been baptized as an infant. Only her immediate family and a handful of others attended, the sanctuary feeling cavernous and empty with so few people to fill it. Lily wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried a simple bouquet of the last autumn flowers from their garden. Zachary stood at the altar in a new suit, his face solemn but his eyes warm as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony with perfunctory efficiency, clearly uncomfortable with the hasty nature of the whole affair, but unwilling to refuse a couple who were technically meeting all the requirements for a proper Christian marriage. When Zachary slipped the ring onto Lily's finger, she noticed that his hands were trembling slightly, and the realization that he was nervous too somehow made her feel better about her own anxiety. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promised to love and honor one another until death parted them, and sealed their union with a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through Lily's entire body. The wedding breakfast at her parents' home was a quiet affair. Her mother had prepared all of Lily's favorite foods, a last gesture of maternal love before her daughter left for a new life. They ate and made stilted conversation, everyone acutely aware that this was both a celebration and a goodbye. Lily's father presented them with a wedding gift, a beautiful quilt that her mother had been working on in secret for weeks, and the sight of it made tears spring to Lily's eyes as she realized how much her parents truly did love her, despite everything that had happened. By early afternoon, it was time to leave. Zachary had purchased a wagon and provisioned it with supplies for their journey and for setting up their household. Lily's few belongings, her clothes and books and small personal items, were packed into a trunk and loaded into the wagon bed. She embraced her parents, promising to write often, struggling to find words adequate to express everything she was feeling. Her mother held her tight and whispered advice about being a good wife, about patience and flexibility, and the importance of choosing your battles. Her father pressed money into her hand, more than he could afford, and told her that she would always have a home to return to if she needed it. Then, Zachary was helping her up onto the wagon seat, and they were pulling away from the only home she had ever known. Lily looked back once, saw her parents standing together in front of the store, and then forced herself to face forward, toward whatever future awaited her. Zachary sat beside her handling the reins with easy competence, and as they left independence behind, he reached over and squeezed her hand briefly before returning his attention to the horses. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I am not certain," Lily admitted. "Ask me again in a few weeks." He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his whole face and made him look younger and less careworn. "That is fair enough. For what it is worth, I will do everything in my power to make sure that when I ask again, your answer is yes." They traveled for 3 days, camping at night under the stars and pushing westward through the changing landscape. Zachary was a considerate traveling companion, always making sure Lily was comfortable, always asking her opinion about where to stop and what route to take. At night, he set up a small tent for her privacy and slept himself in his bedroll near the fire, giving her space and time to adjust to this new reality. During the long hours on the wagon seat, they talked more than they ever had in independence. Zachary told her stories about his adventures building the ranch, about the time a spring flood nearly washed away their first cabin, about the winter when they almost lost half their herd to a blizzard. Lily told him about her favorite books, about her dreams of one day writing stories of her own, about the small rebellions of her youth when she had snuck away to swim in the creek or climb trees in ways that her mother would have considered unladylike. She found herself laughing more than she had in months, found that Zachary had a dry wit and a gift for storytelling that made even mundane events seem interesting. He was patient with her obvious nervousness about the physical aspects of marriage, never pushing or pressuring, content to let their relationship develop naturally. By the third night, Lily found herself disappointed when he retreated to his own bedroll, found that she was beginning to crave his presence and attention in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. They reached the ranch late on the fourth day, arriving just as the sun was setting and painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and gold. Lily's first glimpse of her new home took her breath away. The house was larger than she had expected, built of sturdy timber with a wide porch across the front. Surrounding it were various outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and beyond that, rolling grassland that seemed to stretch forever under that enormous sky. Everything looked well maintained and prosperous, evidence of years of hard work and careful management. Zachary helped her down from the wagon, and Lily stood for a moment just taking it all in, this place that was now her home. A dog came bounding around the corner of the house, a large friendly creature that wagged its entire body in greeting. Zachary laughed and scratched the animal's ears, introducing him as Buck and assuring Lily that despite his size, he was as gentle as a lamb. Inside, the house was clean and simply furnished but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace at one end and a good iron stove near the work table. Two doors led to what Zachary explained were the bedroom and a smaller room he used as an office. The fourth room, he said a bit awkwardly, was mostly used for storage but could be converted into another bedroom if needed. If needed for children, Lily understood, though neither of them spoke the words aloud. The reality of her situation hit her then, standing in this house that was now hers, married to a man she had known for less than 2 weeks. She must have looked stricken because Zachary immediately crossed to her side, his expression concerned. "Are you overwhelmed?" he asked gently. "I know this is a lot to take in all at once." "I just realized that I am married," Lily said, and then laughed at how absurd that sounded. "I mean, I knew I was married, obviously, but standing here in your house, our house, it suddenly feels very real." "Would it help if I told you that I am equally terrified?" Zachary asked with a slight smile. "I have been living alone for years, Lily. I am not entirely certain I remember how to share space with another person, let alone a wife. We are both going to make mistakes as we figure this out." His honesty did help, and Lily felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I suppose we learn together then." "Exactly," Zachary said. He gestured toward the bedroom door. "I should show you where everything is, help you get settled. And Lily, I want you to know that I meant what I said before. I will not pressure you about anything. We have time to build our relationship, to become comfortable with one another. There is no rush." Lily felt her cheeks warm but appreciated his consideration more than she could say. That night, they shared an awkward but not unpleasant supper of the provisions from the wagon, and then Zachary showed her to the bedroom and excused himself, saying he had some work to catch up on in his office. Lily changed into her nightgown and climbed into the large bed, expecting to lie awake for hours, her mind churning. Instead, exhausted from the journey and the emotional upheaval of the past week, she fell asleep almost immediately. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then memory returned. She dressed quickly in one of her simple work dresses and emerged from the bedroom to find Zachary at the stove, looking domestic and capable as he prepared breakfast. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "I hope you slept well. I thought I would make us a proper breakfast before I show you around the property." They fell into a routine over the following days and weeks. Zachary would rise early and handle the most physically demanding ranch work, tending to the animals and checking fences and all the 100 other tasks that keeping a ranch running required. Lily took over the domestic duties, cooking and cleaning and discovering that she enjoyed having a home of her own to manage even if she was still learning. In the afternoons, Zachary would teach her about the ranch, showing her how to care for the chickens he kept, how to milk the cow, how to recognize different plants and herbs. They talked constantly, learning one another's rhythms and preferences, sharing stories and opinions and dreams. Lily discovered that Zachary was well-read despite his rough-hewn appearance, that he loved poetry and could recite entire passages from memory. He learned that she had a gift for numbers and accounts, and gladly turned over the ranch's financial records for her management. They laughed together, worked together, and slowly, inevitably, began to fall in love. The physical aspects of their marriage developed more slowly, with both of them feeling their way carefully. The first time Zachary kissed her properly, not the chaste peck from their wedding but a real kiss full of heat and longing, it happened almost by accident. They were washing dishes together after supper, standing side by side at the work table, and their hands bumped in the soapy water. They both laughed, and when Lily looked up, she found Zachary gazing at her with such tender intensity that her breath caught. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was everything Lily had imagined, and nothing like she had expected all at once, soft and sweet, but with an undercurrent of passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers and whispered that he was falling in love with her, that she was the most remarkable woman he had ever met, that saving his life had been the beginning but everything since had only confirmed that she was extraordinary. Lily found her voice enough to whisper back that she was falling in love with him too, that she had been frightened to admit it even to herself, but could not deny it any longer. They kissed again, longer this time, and when Zachary pulled back and asked if she wanted to move their relationship forward, to make their marriage complete, Lily nodded without hesitation. He carried her to their bedroom with surprising ease, and what followed was tender and careful and far more wonderful than Lily's limited understanding had prepared her for. Zachary was patient and attentive, making sure she was comfortable, whispering words of love and encouragement. There was some pain, as she had been warned there would be, but it was brief and overwhelmed by other sensations that left her gasping and clinging to him. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Lily felt a completeness she had never experienced before, as though some part of her that had always been missing had finally clicked into place. Their marriage deepened and strengthened over the following months. Winter came to Kansas with ice and snow, and Lily discovered that she did not mind being confined to the house with only Zachary for company. They read aloud to one another in the evenings, played checkers and cards, made love frequently and with growing confidence. Zachary taught Lily to shoot, to ride properly, to do basic repairs around the ranch. She taught him to cook more than just the simple fare he had survived on alone, introduced him to herbs and seasonings that transformed ordinary meals into something special. They visited Matthias and Sarah several times, and Lily found that she liked Zachary's brother and sister-in-law immediately. Sarah was close to Lily's own age, warm and welcoming, delighted to have another woman nearby. She and Lily quickly became close friends, visiting back and forth when weather permitted, sharing the work of preserving food and sewing quilts. Matthias was quieter than Zachary but equally kind, and he made it clear that Lily was not just welcomed but valued as part of the family. In January, Lily realized that her monthly courses had not come, and by February she was certain she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening after supper, watched as the news registered on his face and transformed into pure joy. He swept her into his arms, careful even in his excitement not to hold her too tight, and whispered his gratitude and love. That night, they talked for hours about the future, about names and cradles and all the dreams they had for this child who would be born from the love that had grown between them. Spring arrived with green grass and wildflowers, and Lily bloomed along with the landscape, her body changing in ways that both fascinated and frightened her. Zachary was attentive almost to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she felt well, if she needed anything, if she was doing too much. Sarah visited regularly with advice and reassurance, having given birth to 2 children of her own, and Lily found her presence enormously comforting. The baby came in early September, a full year after Lily had first helped that bleeding stranger in Independence. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Lily wondered if she would survive it. But Sarah stayed with her throughout, offering encouragement and support, and Zachary held her hand and refused to leave even when Sarah suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. When their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Lily wept with relief and joy. They named him Thomas, after Lily's father, and Zachary wrote to her parents with the news. A month later, a letter arrived from Missouri with blessings and congratulations, and the news that Thomas and Martha Bennett hoped to visit the following summer to meet their grandson. The letter also mentioned that Independence had been scandalized recently by the revelation that one of the town's most respected citizens had been caught in financial improprieties, far worse than anything Lily had ever been accused of, and that some people had been quietly suggesting that perhaps they had been too hasty in their judgment of the Bennett girl. Lily found that she did not care about vindication from people who had treated her so poorly. Her life now was fuller and happier than anything she could have experienced in Independence. She had a husband who loved her completely, a beautiful son who brought her joy every day, a home that was truly hers, and a future bright with promise. The punishment she had endured for helping a stranger had led her to this place, to this life, and she could not bring herself to regret any of it. Her parents did visit the following summer, making the long journey to Kansas with evident determination. Lily watched anxiously as her father met Zachary for the first time since the wedding, but whatever concerns Thomas Bennett might have harbored were quickly dispelled. He could see that his daughter was genuinely happy, that her husband treated her with respect and affection, that she had built a good life for herself. By the end of their visit, Thomas was shaking Zachary's hand with real warmth and thanking him for taking such good care of his daughter. The years passed with the rhythm of ranch life, measured in seasons and harvests, in cattle drives and foaling seasons, in the growth of their children. Lily and Zachary had 3 more babies over the next several years, 2 daughters and another son, each one welcomed with joy and celebrated as the blessing they were. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing larger and more successful with each passing year. Lily never forgot the kindness that had started everything, the decision to help a bleeding stranger even at personal cost. She made it a point to teach her children the importance of compassion, of standing up for what was right even when it was difficult, of judging people by their character rather than their circumstances. Zachary supported her in this, often sharing the story of how they met, how their mother's courage and kindness had not only saved his life, but transformed both their futures. When their eldest son Thomas turned 18, Lily and Zachary made the journey back to Independence for the first time since their wedding. The town had changed, grown larger and busier, but some things remained familiar. They stayed with Lily's parents, who were older now but still running the general store, and reconnected with a few old friends. Many of the people who had judged Lily so harshly were either gone or had the grace to look embarrassed when they encountered the obviously happy and prosperous Mrs. Ross. On their last evening in Missouri, Lily and Zachary took a walk through town, past the church where they had married, past the hotel where Zachary had stayed during his courtship, past the spot where he had first collapsed, and Lily had made the choice to help him. They stood there in the fading light, hands clasped, and Lily realized that she would not change a single moment of their journey together, not even the painful parts. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "Do you ever wish you had closed the door that day, left me in the street, saved yourself all the trouble that followed?" Lily turned to face him, this man who had become her whole world, and smiled. "Not for a single instant. You gave me a life I could never have imagined, Zachary. You gave me love and adventure and a family and a home that is truly mine. You came back for me when no one else would have." "I could not do anything else," Zachary said simply. "From the moment I saw you kneeling beside me with your hands covered in my blood and compassion in your eyes, I knew you were someone extraordinary. Coming back for you was not a choice, Lily. It was an inevitability." They kissed there in the gathering dusk, two people whose lives had been forever altered by a single act of kindness and the courage to follow through on the consequences. When they returned to Kansas, it was with a sense of completion, of chapters closed and new ones beginning. Their children were growing, taking on more responsibility with the ranch, beginning to dream their own dreams of the future. As the years continued to unfold, Lily often thought about the strangeness of fate, how a moment's decision could reshape an entire life. She had been punished for helping a stranger, had lost everything she thought she valued, and in return had gained something infinitely more precious. The people of Independence had meant to break her spirit, to make an example of her, but instead, they had inadvertently set her free. Zachary remained the love of her life, her partner in every sense of the word. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated weddings as their children married, welcomed grandchildren with joy. The ranch they had built together became a legacy, something solid and enduring that would outlast them both. But more than the land or the cattle or the material success, what they had built was a love story, one that had begun in blood and punishment and had bloomed into something beautiful. When Sarah suggested they should write down their story, preserve it for future generations, Lily agreed. She spent months working on it, capturing not just the facts but the emotions, the fear and hope and love that had defined their journey. The resulting manuscript was raw and honest, a testament to the power of compassion and the unexpected ways that love can find us even in our darkest moments. As Lily entered her 50s, still healthy and active but aware of the passage of time, she would sometimes stand on her porch and look out over the land that had become home. She would think about the girl she had been in Independence, proper and constrained, living a life that fit within the boundaries others had drawn. She barely recognized that person now, that Lily who had been so concerned with reputation and respectability. The woman she had become was stronger, braver, more fully herself than she could have imagined. She had learned to ride like a man when the situation required it, had helped deliver calves and foals, had stood beside Zachary during difficulties and celebrations with equal courage. She had raised 4 children to be kind and honest and hardworking. She had built a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. She had lived. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Lily with a party. The whole family gathered, children and grandchildren, Matthias and Sarah and their brood, friends and neighbors from across the county. There was food and music and dancing, and at the height of the celebration, Zachary stood and raised his glass for a toast. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, I rode into a town in Missouri bleeding and desperate and certain I was going to die. A young woman I had never met pulled me inside her father's store and saved my life, even though doing so cost her dearly. She was punished for her kindness, rejected by people she had known her whole life, treated as though she had done something shameful when in fact she had done something heroic. He paused, finding Lily in the crowd, his eyes still holding the same warmth and love they had from the beginning. I came back for her because I could not stand the thought of her suffering for saving me. I proposed marriage thinking I was offering her a way out, a solution to her problems. What I did not realize was that she was going to save me a second time in ways I could never have anticipated. Lily, you did not just save my life that day. You gave it meaning and purpose and joy. Every day since has been a gift, and I thank God for sending me to independence, for the outlaws who ambushed me, for every circumstance that led me to your door. Tears streamed down Lily's face as Zachary crossed to her side and took her hands in his. Here is to 25 more years, he said softly, and the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. They did not get 25 more years, but they got 15 good ones. 15 years of continued happiness and growing family and deepening love. When Zachary died at the age of 66, peacefully in his sleep after a full day of working the ranch he loved, Lily grieved deeply, but without regret. They had lived well together, had built something lasting, had loved one another as completely as 2 people could. She remained on the ranch, supported by her children and grandchildren, still managing the accounts and offering advice even as she gradually passed more responsibility to the next generation. She wrote more stories, some about her life with Zachary, others purely from imagination, and found satisfaction in seeing her words on paper, in knowing that their story would endure. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch where she and Zachary had spent countless hours, and she would remember. She would remember the feel of his hand in hers, the sound of his laugh, the way he looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in his world. She would remember the journey that had brought them together, the punishment that had led to paradise, the stranger who had become her everything. When Lily herself passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last coherent words were about Zachary, about how she would see him soon, about how their story was not ending but simply moving to a new chapter. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county, all of them wanting to pay respects to a woman who had become a pillar of the community, known for her kindness and wisdom and the fierce love she had shown her family. Her children found the manuscript of her story among her papers, the account of how she and Zachary had met and fallen in love. They had it properly bound and printed, distributed copies to family members, preserved their mother's words for future generations. The story became a treasured part of family lore, passed down through the years, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to our greatest blessings. The ranch itself continued to prosper under the management of Thomas and his siblings, growing and adapting with the changing times while still maintaining the values that Lily and Zachary had instilled. The house where they had lived and loved and raised their family remained at the heart of it all, preserved and maintained, a monument to the power of choosing compassion over caution, love over fear. Decades after both Lily and Zachary had passed, their great-great-grandchildren would read the story of how they met and marvel at the courage it must have taken, at the risks involved, at the way two strangers had built something so enduring from such an unpromising beginning. Young couples facing their own doubts and difficulties would draw strength from knowing that their ancestors had overcome far greater obstacles and had not just survived but thrived. The people of Independence, Missouri, who had once judged Lily Bennett so harshly, eventually came to regret their actions. As the years passed, and stories filtered back about the successful ranch in Kansas and the happy family that Lily had built there, the town's treatment of her became something of a cautionary tale. Preachers would sometimes reference it in sermons about the dangers of being too quick to judge, about remembering that mercy and compassion should always triumph over rigid adherence to social codes. The general store that Thomas Bennett had run past eventually to distant relatives, and they maintained a small display honoring Lily, the girl who had left Independence in disgrace and had gone on to live a remarkable life. The display included a copy of her manuscript, photographs of her and Zachary and their children, and a simple plaque that read, "She was punished for her kindness, but kindness always wins in the end." The story of Lily and Zachary became more than just a family legend. It became a reminder that love often comes when we least expect it, that courage and compassion matter more than reputation, and that sometimes the greatest punishment can become the greatest blessing. Their love, which had begun in blood and fear and social condemnation, had grown into something that transcended time and circumstance, something that continued to inspire long after both of them had gone. In the end, what had seemed like punishment had actually been liberation. Lily's exile from Independence had freed her to become the woman she was meant to be, to live a life of adventure and purpose rather than constraint and propriety. Zachary's return had not just offered her a way out, but had given her a partner who saw and valued her true self, who encouraged her strength rather than trying to diminish it. Their story was proof that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to us is actually a gift in disguise, that closed doors can lead to open horizons, and that love, when it is real and true, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership, can weather any storm and overcome any obstacle. The cowboy who came back for the woman who saved him had done more than just make her his bride. He had given her wings to fly, and together they had soared higher and farther than either could have managed alone. Their legacy lived on not just in the land they had worked or the children they had raised, but in the example they had set, in the proof they had provided that choosing love and kindness and courage, even when it costs us dearly, is always the right choice. And somewhere beyond the veil of mortality, if such things are possible, perhaps Lily and Zachary were together still, their love story continuing in whatever comes next, eternal and unbreakable as it had always been meant to be.